best and worst performances. If you look at the top athletes, they always bring up one word when they talk about their performances: consistency. A lot of people think it's confidence, but it's actually consistency. We all perform well sometimes, and we all perform lousy other times. The key is, how do I perform really well on a regular basis? Consistency. We can't even talk about having a consistent performance if we don't first talk about having consistent thoughts, consistent feelings, and consistent behaviors. One of the best ways to get some clarity on the situation is by writing down your best competitions, your best performances, and on a different piece of paper, your worst performances. And the idea on both of these is to think about exactly what was going on in my mind. What thoughts was I having? What feelings was I having? What songs was I listening to? What behaviors was I taking? What actions was I taking? You want to have that all written down, be as specific as possible, and dig deeper than the surface. Right? Get under the surface. What exactly was going on? Every piece of information that you come up with is a gold nugget. Really bring yourself back to those performances and see what was going on in your mind. So, again, step one, write down your best performances on one page. I like you to do it on one page if you can, because the idea here, the whole point of this is to find what is the underlying theme. Is there any consistent pattern? Is there any thread that goes through all of these best performances? We're looking for patterns. But first things first, don't even think about the pattern. Write down your best 3 performances. What was going on in your mind? What exactly were you thinking? Like I said, push yourself. Don't just say you were confident. Why were you confident? What thoughts were you having? And why? So write that down. One competition at a time, what was going on in your mind. And if you're like most people, these are the things you tend to think about. I was focusing on my technique. I was treating all opponents the same. My intensity level was consistent. I wasn't making it into a big deal. There were no special performance. I was just doing what I was always doing. I was just being me. It's a new competition. I'm not thinking about the past or the future. And I don't care who's watching me, or I don't care who's in front of me. That's what most people tend to think. Well, go through this exercise for yourself. Write down those 3 competitions, and then after you're done, come up with any of the themes that are going on. Either circle them, or highlight them, or write them on the back of this page. Now, after you're done with that, you're going to do the same exact thing with your worst performances. What exactly were you thinking before and during your worst performances? You always want to think before and during. What exactly was it? And push yourself. Don't just say you were nervous. Why were you nervous? What exactly were you telling yourself? What were the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that you were taking before and during these performances? That's going to give you some clarity in what you don't want to tell yourself. Okay? So, before you go through those themes, those patterns, those threads, write it down as specific and concretely as possible. We started with the positive, right? Because we like to start off on a good foot, gets us started, gets the ball rolling. Well, now it's a little bit harder. A lot of times we don't like to think about the negatives that were going on in our mind. We don't like to relive those bad performances, but it's so important that we do that. So write that down. And if you're like most people, here are the common themes we find in your best performances. We're not focused on our best moves, our best techniques. We're focusing on our opponent's best techniques. What are our opponent's strategies? We're trying to defend our opponent instead of imposing our will on our opponent. We're overestimating our opponent, or we're underestimating our opponent. Again, our orientation, our focus is not on ourselves, it's on them. Having an up and down intensity level. Looking at the competition as a big competition, or looking at it as a small competition. Thinking about letting down our parents, our coaches, our friends, our family. We're thinking of the significance of a competition. This is a championship, or this is the semifinals, or this is a rivalry game. We do that, and it tends to mess us up. We're thinking about records, rankings, seedings, predictions. And we're thinking about what happened the last time we competed against this opponent. Or we're thinking sometimes about the last time we competed in general. So, if you're like most people, those tend to be the reoccurring themes. So, you write those down. You find those underlying themes, the patterns, the underlying thread behind all of them. Maybe either circle them, highlight them, or write it on the back. Then you want to have on those 2 different pieces of paper, side by side, you look at them. And you could see they're usually 2 different people. Almost everyone raises their hand when I lead a group discussion with this. They say it's like opposite people. It's 2 totally different people. It stresses, it really shows, it demonstrates how important your mindset is. These are your best and worst competitions, and you look like 2 totally different people, which shows that almost all of it is in the mind. So have those written down. You compare those side by side, and here's the secret right here. When you look at those best performances and you find those patterns, those themes, do more of that. Tell yourself more of that. And when you look at those worst performances, do less of that. When you find those underlying themes and patterns, tell yourself less of those. Now again, I went through some of the most common things that we hear when we speak to other athletes. By and large, I would say that's true, and it's probably true for you, but there's always going to be some variability. You might be a little bit different than those people that I read, those common situations that we just spoke about. Some people, they make a competition into a really big deal and they do well. That's few people, it's the minority. But if that's you, do more of it. Like we said, the secret to success is find out what works and do more of it. Find out what doesn't work and do less of it. And very frequently, most people don't ever put this down on paper. You want to have it down on paper because when we keep it in our head, it's just floating around. It's theoretical. It's philosophical. It's an abstraction. Once you put it down on paper, now you can see it. You could add to it. You could take things away from it. And this exercise is supposed to be a work in progress. So when you compete really well, don't just pat yourself on the back and go out to dinner. Write it down. What exactly was I thinking? What exactly was I doing? What exactly were my emotions? And when you compete really poorly, again, don't just kick yourself, don't just beat yourself up. Write it down on the other performances. What exactly was I thinking, feeling, and doing? Make it a work in progress. Get greater clarity on what you need to do to bring out your best and avoid competing at your worst.